Good evening, everyone. Welcome to our third and final lecture in Ron Rolheiser's series, From Willpower to Grace. Such an important topic in today's world, isn't it? Now, I want to see a show of hands. How many of you in the last 2 weeks have learned something or been inspired by something that Father Ron has shared? Okay, fantastic. We're excited about this final lecture tonight. We also do want to remind you about Friday night. We have a world-class theologian coming to speak, and it's open to the public. Friday evening right here at 7 o'clock. David Tracy will be here, so if you're able, we really want to welcome you. Once again, my name is David Pachta, and as of today, I'm still a PhD student studying spirituality here at OST. And on behalf of the school, we really want to welcome you. It is our honor and treat to have you here as our guests. Now, as a reminder, if your cell phone goes off during the lecture, we might move from grace to willpower and commandeer it. I'm personally due for an upgrade. No, I'm just kidding. But no, do please check your phones and make sure that they are set to silent so that it doesn't interrupt the lecture tonight. As you've already learned by sitting and listening to Ron and sitting at his feet, he is a man who has multiple talents. He's a scholar and a pedagogue and a comedian. And I, like many of the students here, am working hard to learn all three from him, which is why last week I tried to teach a wolf mindfulness. He became a werewolf. Obviously, I have much to learn from the master. Please join me in welcoming Father Ron Rolheiser to the stage for his final lecture.
Good evening, everyone. How's the sound? Well, I got to pay David back with a pun on this, but you know that they just recently, if you look at on the internet, in Jamaica right now, it costs $2.50 for a slice of pie, and in the Bahamas, it costs $2.25 for a slice of pie, and those are the pie rates of the Caribbean. Okay. Well, since David introduced with this horrible pun, I had to pay him back. Okay. Incident, just further, on Friday night, David Tracy, for those of you who don't know, David Tracy is probably, since Bernard Lonergan died, the leading Catholic intellectual of the last century. Taught for years at the University of Chicago, taught with Bernie McGinn, and he's just retired now. He's a professor emeritus, so you would see one of the great theologians, certainly of the United States and in the English-speaking world. So Friday night here, I can't promise you'll understand him. Okay, he's also an abstract thinker, but he may just be also understandable. But he's a great theologian. Okay. Did something happen here? No. Well, there it is. Okay. Okay, just a very quick review. So we're looking at moving from willpower to grace, how to overcome our congenital bad habits, addictions, and reticence. And so we looked at, the first night we looked at the spirituality of willpower and grace. Last week we looked at an anthropology of willpower and grace and our struggles towards radical sobriety. And today I want to look at living in grace, accessing the power of the resurrection and commandments for the long haul. I want to do it in 4 parts. And brief review we've just done. I want to do a little bit about what is radical sobriety. You know, what is sobriety, period, what we're trying to achieve and so on. And then I want to look at how we access grace through the resurrection, and then how do we get to, what helps us to get to radical sobriety. But I want to begin with the concept of radical sobriety. Okay. I'm going to begin with 2 quotes that I like. First one, it comes from any of you involved in 12-step programs, and this is a line from Alcoholics Anonymous, where they say, you are as sick as your sickest secret. Hang on to that. You're going to see that the road to sobriety is about 95% to do with honesty. And sobriety can almost be identified with honesty, and the road to Non-sobriety is always the road of secrecy, of lying, of not being open, and so on. But this is a very important line. You are sick as your sickest secret, which means as soon as your sickest secret is revealed, you're no longer sick. Okay? And the second one, I got this, I was provincial of our order in Western Saskatchewan for 6 years, and my vicar was an alcoholic in recovery, and a wise man, and he always said this. He said, addiction is only partially about a chemical, it's mostly about honesty. And we're going to see that the second half of tonight's talk. Addiction is just so much about dishonesty, and sobriety is so much about honesty. Okay, and I want to begin with 3 stories. I think I'm only going to tell you 2, but the first 2, I call them a struggling monk, an earnest priest, and an indiscreet minister. I might not do the indiscreet minister, but let's do the struggling monk and the earnest priest. Now, these are going to be strong stories because they're true stories, so I hope you're not scandalized with them because they're happy stories. Okay. But some years ago, I was giving a retreat to a group of Trappist monks. Cistercian monks, that's the strictest order in the world. And I was there for a week, and during the course of the week, there's about 60 monks in the order, and probably 40 of them, because they don't talk. So when the retreat master comes, they have a chance, and so on. And probably 40 of them spend time with me. And one of them told me a great story. So this young guy comes in, he's probably late 30s. And you know how sometimes body language, we don't realize that our body language says so much. You look at a person, sometimes, we're heavy, or we're somber, or we radiate anger, or we radiate something, but our body language always says something almost immediately about ourselves that's deeper than our words. So this young man came in and sat down, a monk, but there was literally a glow about him. Literally, you could tell, this guy, there was something, his life, he was on top of his life. So I said to him, God, you look great. You must be feeling good. He said, I am. He said, I'm seeing the world in color. It's quite a line. He says, first thing, I am seeing the world in color. He said, but it hasn't always been like that. He said, I'm 38 years old. He says, and I've been at the monastery for 20 years. He said, and realistically, he said, I probably wasted the first 18 years of that. He said, I entered the monastery. He said, and I was carrying some baggage, some major baggage. He said, I was 18. He said, I entered the monastery. He said, and I was gay. He said, I'm gay. And I said, and I never dealt with that, really. He said, but not only that, he said, I brought 2 addictions into the monastery. I was an alcoholic. So I was gay, was an alcoholic, and he said, I also brought a sexual addiction, pornography and masturbation. So he said, I entered the monastery, he said, and I was sincere. He said, he said, I performed well. In fact, he had worked his way up the pecking order. He was about 3 or 4 from the top in terms of, sub-prior and other priors and so on, sub-whatever, He said, I was a high performance. He said, but for those first 18 years, he said, the way I would describe it, he said, I wasn't seeing the world in color. He said, I was addicted. And he said, first of all, addictions are hard to work out in a monastery. He said, if you're an alcoholic, there isn't any liquor around. He said, but you manage. Okay. He said, there was always some mass wine I could get to. He said, but this is what I'd do. He says, I'd wait till all the monks were asleep. So then I'd take the van. He said, I'd drive into town, which was about 30 miles. He said, and I'd go to gay bars or to bars and I'd drink. He said, and then and oftentimes, he said, I'd watch pornography or whatever. He said, then I'd have to get back to the monastery. And he said, and there's a short window of opportunity because some monks only go to bed at 11 o'clock and some get up at 3. He said, so you really, he said, so I'm doing this. He said, but my whole life is obsessed with these addictions, even though I'm performing pretty well. He said, and about 3 years ago, he said, in prayer, it just came to me. He said, I can't live like that. I simply can't live like that. He said, and I went to the abbot, and he said, and I was honest with him. He said, probably hadn't been that honest with anybody since my mother at about 3 years old. He said, from my whole youth, he said, I always had secrets and whatever. He said, so in a moment of grace, he said, I was just told the abbot everything, fully expecting to be kicked out. The abbot said, no. The abbot said, you've been driving into town 2 or 3 nights a week. He said, now you're going to drive into town 2, 3 nights a week again, except you're going to go to AA meetings and to Sexual Anonymous meetings. He said, now I've been doing it. He said, and the best I can say, it's completely transformed my life. He said, I see the world, it's in color again. He said, and I'm in the moment. When I go to pray now, I can pray. When I go to community meeting, I can be at a community meeting. He said, before that, when you're addicted, it's always your next hit. He said, how am I going to sneak out tonight? And is this jerk going to go to bed early enough so I can get out and get the van? And this guy shouldn't get up too early. And he said, everything is, everything's around your addiction. He said, and everything's dishonest. Now notice he was living 2 lives. On the surface, he was living a good life. But underneath, there was this dark secret, and underneath there was a fundamental kind of non-integrity and so on. And he says, it's transformed my life. He says, I've never been this happy, and literally he was just like radiating. He said, I'm seeing the world in color again. Okay, that's sobriety. That's sobriety in contrast to the state he was in before, which was non-sobriety. Now the second one, the earnest priest. Good story. Some years ago, I preached a retreat to a large archdiocese, priests. And started on Monday. Tuesday night, after the conference, 5 of the priests said, join us. Our support group is meeting tonight. So I went with them. We went to the breakout room, and they had some scotch and some beer and some finger foods and so on. It's kind of ironic because they're a group for radical sobriety. Okay. But they were radically sober even as they were drinking scotch. Okay. But before they got to the scotch and the finger foods, and they do this every week, Every week they meet on Tuesday nights, these same 5 priests, okay? But before they got to the scotch and the finger foods, they spent about 45 minutes during which each of the priests made a searingly honest confession to the whole group about everything they had done in the last week, to the smallest detail. Just a radically honest, humble confession of all their faults. And then they had the scotch and the peanuts and so on. And as they're having this, the leader of the group, who had founded the group, he told me, he said, Father, he said, I founded this group. He said, and I founded it 5 years ago. He said, I founded it for this reason. He said, I was a good priest, but I wasn't a great priest. He said, I was a good priest, but I wasn't a great priest. He said, let me give you the reasons for both. He said, I was a good priest. He said, I went to the seminary with the right motivation, wanted to serve God, the people. Said, and I studied as best I could, got pretty decent marks, was ordained. Said, I spent a few years in a city parish. He said, and then the bishop assigned me to 5 rural parishes. He said, I'd never been in the country before in my life. He said, I'm a city kid. He said, but he said, I liked it. It was my first time in the country. He said, but I had 5 parishes. He said, which was way too much work. He said, and I was killing myself doing this work. He said, it was a different meeting every night, all these liturgies on Sunday. He said, but I was young and had energy. He said, something? He said, the people loved me. They thought I was Francis of Assisi. They thought I was a new incarnation. He said, I was young and I was doing, I said, I was really a good priest. He said, I was working and giving myself to people to the point of breaking my health. He said, I was a good priest, but I wasn't a great priest. He said, I can tell you why. He says, I kept some compensations. And he said, to make this all work, that's the irony. He said, to make everything else work, he said, I had some compensations. And he said, compensatory things in my life. He said, and the first one he said was anger. He said, resentment. He said, I love people who love me. And I worked very well with people who were enthusiastic. And people said, like, you're Francis of Assisi. You're this wonderful, wonderful priest. And you're wonderful, wonderful parishioners. He said, with any opposition, he said, I'd get pretty cold. He said, and they carried a lot of bitterness, hated the bishop, and so on. He said, I'm a good priest. He said, but I got this. He said, and then secondly, he said, I was working so hard, living alone. And he said, the priest's salary isn't great. He said, but I had no life, really. He said, so I was spending all of it on just, pampering myself. He said, I bought every comforting thing he could buy and every CD and gadget and computer parts and the best car and loaded that with things. And so when he said, and I went to a restaurant, I went to a good restaurant, ordered the best cut of steak there was. He said, I drank expensive wine. He said, and the people knew I had good taste, so they parlor me with all this expensive stuff. He said that was compensatory. He said, I didn't realize my lifestyle was just escalating. He said, but that wasn't even the main thing. He said, you know how I handled all my tension and how I handled my celibacy? He said, I handled it through masturbation. He said, that's the way I handled my tension. He said, so I had no illusions that I was Mother Teresa. He said, and that changed, or began to change, he said, with my father's death. He said, my father died. He said, and I very much admired him. He said, I drove across the state for the funeral, was driving back, he said, and I was thinking about my dad. He said, and I was praying in the car, I was crying, and I thought, no, I'm not going to be a good priest, I'm going to be a great priest. No more compensations, no more anger, I'm just going to be Mother Teresa. He said, but I was naive. He said, I thought I could do that by willpower. He said, I realized you can't. He said, you can't change your life just through willpower. He said, you need grace and you need community. He said, so after I realized I couldn't do this by myself, he said, I called my 4 closest priest friends together. He said, now we all do it. We meet every week. And he says, and with the help of each other, we can stay this honest. And they called themselves the Group for Radical Sobriety. He said, we're trying to be radically sober, which I'm going to define in a few minutes, and so on. And he said, we're trying to be radically sober. And it's interesting, each one of the priests had a similar story. I was good, but I wasn't great. And the youngest priest in the group, who was only 38, he says, you know, Father, he said, I just joined this group 2 years ago. And he said, doing this is, he said, it's the hardest thing I've ever done. He said, not the going to confession. He said, no, that's easy. He said, but being 38 and trying to live like Mother Teresa, he said, that's hard. But then he said this, he said, but it's also the best thing I've ever done. He said, I've never been this happy. He said, this is the best thing I've ever done. You know that famous parable of the rich young man, okay, who comes to Jesus, and Jesus asks him to give up everything, and he won't. They said, he went away sad. Notice they didn't say he went away bad. He went away sad. We've always villainized this young man. You know, he's lost his vocation. No. He came to Jesus as a very good, rich, sad young man, and he left Jesus as a very good, rich, sad young man. You know? So this young man's priest says, I've never been this happy. You know, there's a great quote from Léon Blois, the famous French philosopher who was so instrumental in the Maritain coming to Christianity. And Léon Blois used to say, he says, when you reach a certain stage of maturity, he said, there's only one true sadness left in life, and it's the sadness of not being a saint. Isn't that quite a line? He said, ultimately, there's only one sadness in life. It's the sadness of not being a saint. You know, these young men, they were happy. They said, we're trying to be radically sober. Now, what is radical sobriety? You'll see it there. First of all, sobriety has degrees. You know, you're not sober or an unsober. You know, you're a drunk or you're sober according to degrees. You know, all of us in this room, if you're in this room tonight, if you've come here with a certain degree of sobriety, you're a good person. You know, are we radically sober? Like these young men said, we're trying to be radically sober. It says that when our parishioners look at us, what they see is what they get. We want to be transparent. We want to be completely honest, you know, or in a sense that seeing colors again. We want to be free from obsessions and so on. Remember that the young monk I described, he said, now I'm free of obsessions. I'm a free person. I see things in color again and so on. And then very importantly, that sobriety, that is our ultimate gift to the community. You know, we all bring something to community, and our lives are a gift, our virtues are a gift, our talents are a gift, but the ultimate gift we bring to any family or community is our honesty, is our sobriety. You know, in Sufi mysticism, they have a great expression. They say, if you live with us dishonestly, you bring us a great disservice. If you live with us honestly, you bring us a great gift. That's interesting. If you live with us dishonestly, you do us a great disservice. If you live with us honestly, you bring us a great gift. See, the greatest gift we can bring to our families, that we can bring to our communities and so on is the gift of our own integrity, our own honesty, so that we don't have some kind of secret. You know, without trying to pick on anybody, but I'll use this as an example. Very famous example. Happened in the same year. But you know, when Bill Clinton was accused of all this stuff with Monica Lewinsky and so on, and Bill Clinton was a sincere man. But he said, you know, people have to understand that everybody has a private life, you know. Okay. To contrast, when Cardinal Bernardine was accused, and falsely, of sexual abuse of a young man, Bernardine went on national television. He said this. Bernardine says, anybody who knows me knows this isn't true. He said, my life is an open book. And anybody who knows me knows that this is not true. And you know, everybody believed him because of the quality. He says, my life is an open book. That's what sobriety is, you know. You know, that the vicar I had who said that, you know, addictions are only partly about a chemical. They're mainly about dishonesty. And he said, that's the way I pick out alcoholics. It's the way I pick out addicted people. He says, there's a dishonesty in their life. He says, sobriety isn't about a chemical. He said, you can drink if you don't lie. In fact, he left a wonderful moral principle. He says, you can do anything as long as you don't have to lie about it. But that's quite an inhibitor. You can do anything as long as you can do it in the open. You can, as long as you don't lie about it. And see, the first thing in all addicts, and we all are at different levels, is the secret, the lying, something in our life isn't open, our life isn't an open book, and so on. And so our great gift to community is our gift of honesty. When they look at you, that's what they get. And also, ultimately, we'll come back on that, that has to be rooted in gratitude. You know, it's interesting. Remember going back to the story I told you of the young priest who started this group. He said, driving home from my father's funeral, I thought I could do this. He said, I thought I could do it by willpower, but I discovered I couldn't. He said, I realized I needed grace and community. Okay. Now, it's interesting. If you go to the story of the rich young man, okay, he walks away, and Jesus turns to the disciples. He says, I'll tell you truly, it's hard for a rich person to enter the kingdom of heaven. In fact, it's easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than for a rich person to enter the kingdom of heaven. You know? And Peter says, if that's the case, it's impossible. And Jesus said, it is. It is. That was actually a good answer for Peter. He said, it is for humans, but it's not impossible for God. You know, all addictions, we see, you can't overcome them yourself. You can't overcome your faults on your own. It is impossible by willpower. It's not impossible for God. Any of you have ever been in a 12-step program, you know that 12-step programs are predicated on that very thing, that you can't do it on your own. You need community. You need a higher power. You need something beyond you. No addict can give up an addiction alone. Lots of addicts have their addiction and they're in recovery and so on. But you already have that in the Gospels, where Peter said, if that's the case, it's impossible, you know. And Jesus says, you're right, it is for humans. Okay, that's a little bit about what we're striving to be, radical gratitude. Now, how do we get there? Okay, maybe we won't get there. Okay, there we go. Accessing, I'm going to take this into grace, although you're going to also see the willpower thing. And accessing the power of the resurrection, the challenge of the resurrection. In the second half of this, I'm going to go into the commandments for the long haul, and we'll look at, you know, but I want to lay a theological foundation for this. You know, grace, not just grace, but all of Christian life is predicated on one thing, the resurrection of Christ. Remember, Paul says, if Christ didn't rise from the grave, we are the most foolish of all people. You know, the grounding fact of our Christian faith, as you'll see, it's the fact of the resurrection. That if that dead body didn't come out of a grave on Easter Sunday morning, we shouldn't be in this room, you know. find a bar and get drunk. Okay. No, it's the foundation. And incidentally, the New Testament, the story of Jesus, the Bible wasn't written the way it's glued together. They didn't know who Jesus was until he rose from the dead. Then they wrote forwards and they wrote backwards. Then they realized the story of his birth. Then they realized this, and so on. See, the founding fact of Christianity is the resurrection. So Paul says, if there is no resurrection, we're the most sorry, disillusioned of all people. And if there is a resurrection, and we believe there is, then it all works. That's the grounding miracle of Christianity. The same as if you're in the Jewish faith, the grounding miracle for the Jews is the Exodus event. If Moses didn't lead these people through the Red Sea, then Judaism doesn't make sense either. That's their resurrection. Now, so you only have to believe two miracles. The resurrection and the Red Sea. In fact, those of you who are old enough, remember there used to be a wonderful old movie with George Burns called Oh God. Okay. And in there, George Burns plays God, and John Denver's the person in there, and so on. And John Denver's having these visions. At one point, he says to John Denver, he says, I don't know how I got mixed up with all this miracle business to begin with. He said, I've only done 3 miracles in history. He said, the Exodus, the resurrection, and the 69 Mets. Okay. 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 Now, but that's the ground of our faith. But that's where we get our power from. And I want to illustrate that just through one single story, but a powerful story. Okay. Do you know who Maya Angelou was? Okay, she's died a couple of years ago. But Maya Angelou was a larger-than-life figure. She was this woman who, whatever could be done, she did. She sang on opera stages, she acted in movies, she wrote books, she wrote poetry, she sang, she danced, and she was, and also she just filled a room. She just brought energy and life into a room. Now, let me tell you a story. One year at the Anaheim Congress, I don't know if you've ever been to the Anaheim Congress, and so they have the arena there, and at a certain point they have a mass, and they have like 8,000 people. Or the opening service, they have like 8,000 people. And she spoke during the opening service. And the theme that year was the resurrection. So Maya Angelou goes up there, and it was an arena of 8,000 people. You could have heard a pin drop. She said, I want to tell you my story. She said, you all know about me, and I dance and sing and do all this stuff. She said, but that hasn't always been me. She said, I had a tragic, tragic childhood. Said, I was conceived by a teenager who didn't want me. Said, and by the time I was 7 years old, I had been in 6 foster homes. She says, and because of that, she said, I was considered a slow learner. I wasn't in regular schools. She said, and finally, she says, I was in a pretty good home in East St. Louis. Said, and one day, she said, a little 7-year-old girl walking around, and a man who was kind of mentally insane and so on raped her. And she said, she told her mother and then her stepmother, and then they got this man arrested. And said, and then a couple of days later, said, I heard on the radio that he was murdered in prison, the man who had assaulted her. Said, in all this trauma, she says, I went mute. Said, and from age 7 to age 13, I never spoke. And because she never spoke, she was treated in special schools and kind of that she's a slow learner. So she's mute for 6 years, And she said, and then when I was 13 years old, she said, on Easter Sunday, said, I went to Mass with my mother. And she said, they read the gospel about Jesus rising from the dead. She said, and I thought to myself, if God can raise a dead body from the earth, maybe God can raise a dead voice. Said, so I tried speaking and it worked. Said, then I tried singing and that worked too. Said, then I tried dancing and that worked. Said, I tried living and it really worked. Said, and people say, Maya, how did you do that? Said, it's called the power of the resurrection. Said, God can bring any dead body back to life, and anything that's dead can be brought back to life. Said, that's what the resurrection is. And she said, you owe your resurrection to your family, to your friends, to your community. She says, don't stay in any graves. Just don't stay there. You don't have to. You can rise. And so on. The power of the resurrection. Okay. That's the ultimate source of grace. But I want you to take her words to heart. She says, I thought if God can raise a dead body from the grave, God can raise dead parts inside of me. God can give me strength that, I can't give myself. She says, I'm not doing this on my own. Said, once you've been that scarred and that wounded, said, you can't do this on your own. Said, I'm doing it with the grace of God. This woman was grace. Remember, there's, those of you are old enough. Remember, there's a very famous song. I think it was probably her most famous song, Joan Baez, and You're from the South, the night they drove old Dixie down. Remember that song? And there's some haunting lines in there. So she's singing about her brother in the Civil War. She says, he was just 18. He was proud and brave when a Yankee laid him in his grave. Said, I swear by the mud below my feet, you can't raise life up when it's in defeat. You can. See, life is often defeated. We're defeated. We're powerless. We succumb to all kinds of things. We are powerless. You can't raise it up, but God does. And that's why when you talk about grace and so on, higher powers and so on, the first thing you got to talk about is the resurrection. The resurrection. Okay. And it's also then our basis for hope. See, the same way as we have to have a huge hope, we have to have hope for ourselves. Give you an example. What is hope? And those of you who have been in classes with me before, forgive me for the repetition and so on. But I want to start with a great story. Pierre Teilhard de Chardin. He's one of the great figures, Christian figures of the last century. He was a man of hope. He was a scientist, a mystic, a theologian, and just a man who brought a whole rare combination of skills and faith together, and also a man of very, very deep faith, hope-filled. And one day he was a scientist, and one day he was giving a talk to some scientists, but his Christian faith was pretty evident in there. And one of these scientists challenged him. They said, you seem to be very, very optimistic about the world and its future. He said, suppose we blow up the world with an atomic bomb. Then what happens to your optimistic schema? Pierre said, he says, if we blow up the world with an atomic bomb, he said, that'll be a 2 million year setback. That's hope. He said, but what I'm saying is going to happen. He said, not because I'm saying it. He said, because Christ promised it. And in the resurrection, God shows that God has power to deliver on the promise. That's hope. See, hope, don't confuse hope with wishful thinking. If someone says, I hope I could win a lottery, you can't hope to win a lottery. You can wish to win a lottery. But see, a wish is pure fantasy. Hope is based on something. So don't confuse hope with wishful thinking, and don't confuse hope with optimism either. Someone says, I always see the glass is half full, never is half empty. I see sunrises. I got rainbows on my sneakers and so on. That's nice. That's a temperament. There's nothing to do with hope whatsoever. You can be a pessimist and full of hope. You can be an optimist and have no hope. Okay. See, hope, because hope is founded on a promise. Jesus promised it, and see, in the resurrection, God showed that God has power to deliver on the promise. They tell some marvelous stories about Archbishop Tutu in South Africa. At the height of apartheid, they said the soldiers would try to intimidate him. So he's in the cathedral in Cape Town, and so he begins to preach, and the soldiers would come in with their machine guns and line to two sides of the church aisle. Said, Tutu would smile at them and said, well, I'm glad you came to church on a Sunday. Then his wife said, I'm glad you came to join the winning side. He said, we've already won, And he wasn't talking about apartheid. He was talking about life. Remember, we sing these Easter songs. The strife was over, the battle won. We've already won, You know, we just have to live and face it, the fact that we believe it. And to the extent that we live and face it, that's going to empower us. So I want to say later on in the second half, the gospel works if we work it. You know, it doesn't work if you don't work it. You know, so if we live in hope, it works. If we live hopelessly, it doesn't work. You know, because we're not opening ourselves to the grace. And that's not quite the same thing as just living in optimism. It's like Teilhard, you know. Remember, Julian of Norwich gives us this great, great famous line that everybody knows. Says, in the end, all will be well, and all will be well, and every manner of being will be well. Okay? To which Oscar Wilde, sorry. Always get mixed up with Orson Welles. And okay. Oscar Wilde added a wonderful little clip. He said, in the end, all will be well. He said, and if it isn't well, it's still not the end. Okay? None of you have ever ended up where it wasn't well. You've been sometimes where it isn't well. It's not the end, you know? And see, so if we believe it, it's going to happen. It's going to happen. See, that's hope. And that's, again, as Teilhard says, it's founded in the resurrection. He said, this isn't optimism. He said, this is founded on a promise of Christ. Then that God in the resurrection shows that God has power to deliver on a promise. See, that's the basis of grace. And finally, it's also the basis of forgiveness. So that, you know, it's interesting. We don't talk enough as Christians when we do Scripture about the importance and the centrality of forgiveness in the Christian Scriptures and in the resurrection itself. You know, so that the resurrection is 90% about forgiveness, because that is the place that often blocks us from grace, that we just can't forgive. John Shea, a wonderful theologian from Chicago, likes to say, he said, forgiveness is the only new thing you're ever going to see in your life, and everything else is some of the same. You know, you have new computers and new this and new that. He said, but in human life, he said, the only truly novel thing you're ever going to see that's truly different is forgiveness. You know, when we say the Psalms, when we pray the Psalms, and you say that, we sing it too in songs, we say, sing to the Lord a new song. Sing to God a new song. Have you ever wondered what that song is? When you say, well, what's the old song? Okay. If we're supposed to sing a new song to God, what's the old song? The old song is a song where we're singing where nobody forgives. We're bitter, we're wounded, it's this. There's never newness. It's just the same tape going over and over and over again. See, the resurrection is new, it's novel, but it says you have the possibility of forgiveness. Now, in the second half, I'm going to talk about that's not that easy to do, and we shouldn't be glib about it and so on. And forgiveness is also the hardest thing you're going to do, and it's the what precisely we need grace for. But in addictions, now I'm not an expert on this, but people who are in the psychology of addiction say in addictions, oftentimes it's some wound. It's something unredeemed, some wound inside the person that's often driving this and you know, making them susceptible and vulnerable to that addiction. You know, some anger, something with your parents, something whatever, you know. And so if that's true, and I think it is, then part of coming out of this is also forgiveness. You know, and you're going to see forgiveness has to be predicated then on gratitude. Okay, that's the power of the resurrection. I want to stop at this point now for questions before the coffee break, because then afterwards I want to do the commandments and so on. So if we have some runners here, and it can be questions about tonight, but anything about the last 3 weeks on grace and addictions and forgiveness and Scripture and anything you want clarified, commented on. At the back. Or
How about relapse? Is that part of recovery too, when a person trying to be sober and repeating the same thing over and over and expecting a different result sometimes.
Say the very first line again. I missed your very first line.
Is relapse a part
Relapse.
of
Okay.
a part of a recovery in addictions?
You know, I honestly don't know enough about that. Probably somebody who's more deeply involved in 12-step programs and experience could answer that. You know, like, so I would try to give you a psychological or spiritual answer, and I'd probably be wrong. So, you know, I really probably shouldn't say anything because I wouldn't know what I'm talking about. So that's just a humble answer, you know. No, it's a very important question, you know, like what causes, and relapses are pretty common, you know. I know in my experience working as a provincial of alcoholics, a lot of times it's the second or the third time that it'll work, you know. Since this story is public, you know, if you get a chance, read Eric Clapton's book. Eric Clapton is an autobiography. Eric Clapton is, you know, is probably the best guitar player in the entire world, you know, and but it has a long history of alcoholism and a powerful conversion story. So he said he drank for years, and finally friends intervened, and they put him to a clinic actually in Minnesota. He's English, but they took him to a clinic, famous clinic in Minnesota, and he said he fought it for the whole 30 days. You know, and he said, and then when he came out, he said to himself, you know, like, I'll make my own rules. He says, I won't drink hard liquor, but I'll drink beer and wine. Well, you can guess where that story's going to go. Very soon, he was again a full-blown alcoholic. He said, then his friends and family intervened the second time, and they put him back to the same clinic, and he says, and I fought the program the entire way, just, you know, 30 days, I'll tolerate it, I'll get the hell out of here. And he said, so he fought it, he didn't give himself over to the program at all. And he said, the night before he was going to check out, he said, and I was already looking forward, he said, I'm going to have a drink at the airport, you know. And he said, I'm not a religious man. He said, but I can only describe it as a religious experience. He said, at a certain point, he said, I was on my knees and I was crying. And I thought, I'm going to leave, I'm going to drink, and I'm going to die. And he said, all the two programs that didn't work, I suddenly absorbed it all at once. He hasn't had a drink since. And now he's going to all the places he used to drink when he go on vacation. He's in the Bahamas and so on, and he's setting up clinics for alcoholics and so on. He's sold a lot of his, you know, he had collections of guitars and so on. He's using it all in AA. But see, I've seen that similar with some of our priests who would go, they'd relapse, sometimes relapse a second time, and then the third time was all of a sudden it took. And then they're years, never take a drink. But I'm not sure, maybe some of you who have in 12-step programs can comment on the relapse thing.
What I would say in the context that you were leading us into earlier was that relapse begins when dishonesty begins again. The person is radically sober and then begins to tell themselves, well, I don't need that many meetings. Yep. I don't need to talk to people. I don't need to work the steps. I can have a little bit of alcohol. I just won't drink like I used to.
Yep.
And all that dishonesty throws them right back into relapse.
Yeah,
so it's more than the chemical. See, the chemical doesn't throw them into relapse. They're having the emotional relapse long before they ever take the drink or the drug again.
Yeah. Good. Thanks for sharing that. You know, the dishonesty. I can drink beer. I just can't drink scotch. Okay. And they know better. Other questions? Or
no, Father.
Brian, okay.
Father Ron, thank you for that last point about forgiveness. There's an excellent book that I read called The Spirituality of Imperfection, which is informed by 12-step spirituality. One of the more profound ideas that I read in there is that sometimes the being that I need to forgive is God.
Yeah.
And it may seem quite contradictory to those of us who have grown up as Christian that could even be a concept, but I found it to be true for me.
Thanks, Brian. That's a very, very important contribution. See, sometimes we don't think about it, and this is just true for people struggling with addiction. It's true for all of us. the last person we need to forgive is God. You know, we don't realize it, but we have some grudges. And they're deep. And see, and where we're not honest with ourselves, you know. And that's why in our spiritualities, we haven't helped people because we haven't given people permission to be angry at God, you know. And the whole theme of wrestling with God is a very important prayer theme in Scripture. You know, God wants your resistance and your anger and so on. God doesn't want you running away. You know, parents know that with your teenagers and so on, the last thing you want is them just to punt and go away, you know. You can deal with their anger if you talk to them and so on. You can work it out. But see, we nurse a lot of angers towards God. And the reason being simply because in the end, life isn't fair. Life is not fair. And the ultimate author of life is God. And he's the last person we have to forgive. You know, there's a great line that Andrew Greeley wrote to Frankie McCourt. Remember, Frankie McCourt wrote that book, Angela's Ashes, which is a wonderful piece of literature, but it takes whining to pretty high levels, you know. You know, and he's always angry. His dad and his mother didn't protect him, his dad's alcoholism, and so on. So Greeley wrote to me, he said, Frankie, he said, I'll give you some advice. He said, we're both men in our late 60s. They've both died since. He said, we're soon in the next some years we'll face our Maker. So I'll give you some hint. He says, forgive. He said, forgive your dad for his alcoholism. Forgive your mother for not protecting you. Forgive Ireland because it was poor when you lived there. He said, then forgive yourself for becoming an alcoholic and ruining 2 marriages. He said, and then forgive God because life isn't fair. He said, so you don't die a bitter, angry person. He said, because that's the only moral imperative there is. It's quite a line. He said, you don't want to die an angry, bitter person. So that's the only moral imperative. But notice, forgive that, the people who hurt you, and so on. Then forgive yourself for the mistakes you've made, because we also have to practice forgiveness towards ourselves. Sometimes that's the second hardest person to forgive is yourself, and then forgive God.
I'm not sure where this fits in, but the people who served, like I have brothers who served in the Vietnam War, and the post-traumatic syndrome and all that. It's hard for them to forgive themselves for what they did.
Yeah.
And so there are many who take to drinking to drown that pain. You know, it's easy to talk about people who are addicted to alcohol for other reasons and things like that. I'm not excusing that.
Yeah.
But how do we help them? And I'm speaking of one of my brothers.
Yeah, again, I can't give you I don't want to give you a cheap answer to that. That is really, it's a huge, huge problem. And, you know, and it's interesting, you know, there's been books written where people tried to, you know, analyze this. So that, for instance, Vietnam was a war that people came back in a very different condition for. So, for instance, if you look at people who came back from the Second World War, they didn't have the same type of thing. You know, they came back and there was almost the pride. We beat Hitler, you know, and people felt good about that. But see, Vietnam was the first war where people came back, and it was like a lost generation, you know. And you know, you've all seen all these movies from The Deer Hunter to Apocalypse Now to all of this and so on. And it was something about that war that shattered just a lot of psyches, you know. And in some sense, the military, I'm using that in a wide sense, is partly to blame for that. And in that sense that, you know, because they write anthropology books on this, and they say, you know, like, wars have been going on since humans have been on this planet, you know. But there's always been, you know, war's a ritual act, you know, and let me say something, and it's no longer. War used to be a ritual act. Notice soldiers put on uniforms. It's like football players put on uniforms. They used to, you know, and they'd shoot only people with uniforms on, and so on. And it was like a football game. In the Second World War, at a certain point, somebody put down a white flag and it all stopped, you know. Then they all came home and took their uniforms off, and they became civilians. You know, if you go back and you look at, for instance, our native cultures, when they went to war, they'd put on war paint. You know, these were hunters and farmers. They put on war paint, and they'd try to kill people and so on. Then when the war was over, they come back, they wash the war paint off, and you return to be a farmer and so on. See, so what the military does, the military takes a boy or a girl, okay, who's not a soldier, and they put him through boot camp and so on, and they turn him into a soldier, which needs to be done if you go to war. But now we don't know how to undo it anymore. See, so when they come back from, and the same with Iraq and so on, you know, the sad part is more American soldiers have killed themselves from coming back from Iraq and Afghanistan than died there. So today, more of these people have killed themselves than were lost in battle there, because we don't know how to unsoldier them. So today, we know how to turn somebody into a soldier from a civilian, but we don't know how to turn a soldier back to a civilian. And that was new. And I said it with sympathy. After Vietnam, we were lost. You know, but then also war has changed so drastically. Today, you don't have to wear a uniform. They blow up supermarkets and poison your drinking water, and you don't know who's who and anything, you know, and so on. So that so war has become different, and soldiering has become different, and it's kind of got ahead of us. So that, I mean, I don't want to blame the military. It's just that the military, understandably, no longer knows what they're doing in terms of, they know what they're doing in terms of turning a civilian, boy or girl, into a soldier. We have no idea anymore how to undo that, you know. And that's not just, partly is the trauma that's there and post-traumatic stress, but partly it's just, we don't know how to undo that. And we used to. People came back from the First World War, Second World War. Those were horrible wars. And they came back and they would reintegrate. With Vietnam, it started with Vietnam, now today with Afghanistan, and some do, but a lot of them can't. And it's a tragic thing, you know. And see, so there you're going to have drug addiction, you're going to have alcoholism, you're going to have suicides and so on. And it's sad and tragic. But it doesn't fit the normal categories of what of alcoholism and stuff that we're talking about here, or other kinds of addictions.
Well,
Okay, one more, and then we'll have the coffee break. Okay.
dealing with forgiveness.
Pardon?
Dealing with forgiveness is a way of that we've from the resurrection. How does the church has always viewed the sins of the priesthood, the priest through to our laity, is to forgive them. How do we need to resolve that? What with this current problem that we have with different parts of Pennsylvania and Boston and so forth? What can the church do to allay the fear that it's just going to be swept under the rug all the time? Is there anything that can be done, or how do you get that honesty back to it?
Well, not only do we have to do something, it's going to be done. Not necessarily because we want to do it. It has to be done. So that the solutions that are being proposed, both from lay side and from the laity, but also from some of the bishops who are realistically in touch with this, and that is the whole thing has to be turned over to laity, the whole thing, so that they have to, because, and I'm on the clerical side, so I can speak and say, like, we have no more credibility in this. So, I don't know if some of you saw the article I wrote on that some weeks ago where it said, as a priest, I'm completely disadvantaged talking about this, and rightly so, See, so so the more the bishops say, almost the worse it gets. See, what bishops, and all the breastfeeding and all, so it's kind of necessary, but it almost makes things worse, Basically, what dioceses and stuff have to do is they have to say, bring in lay people, competent lay people, say, here are all the books, everything, you do it, you make the public statements, and it'll work to advantage the church, because it is a very small proportion of people who have done that and even have covered it up. But see, the bishops are now symbolically disadvantaged as our clergy, you know, and we have to just admit that and say no, that there's anything I say, no matter how accurate it is still going to be self-defensive, somehow self-serving, you know, and not trusted, and rightly so, you know. Trust was betrayed, and when trust is betrayed, it has to be earned back. And the first way you have to earn it back is you have to open everything up. Remember, we're talking about transparency, you know, see, so that we're as sick as our sickest secret. That's just for humans. That's all for institutions. So everything has to be opened up, you know. So until all the linen is aired, this won't wash clean. It's eventually going to wash clean. I'm not worried about the church. The church, we're 2,000 years old, and we're 1 billion people, and, you know, we're going to survive, you know. But we really need to open all the windows and let all the sheets air out, you know. And that can only be done by just really opening it up. And young Bishop Barron from Los Angeles just wrote that in his column recently. He said, Bishop said, we just have to bring in laity and open it all up and let them, you know, in a certain sense, clean up the mess. And then it'll wash clean. Because as long as there's an internal investigation, you know how that it's just suspect from the beginning. So the church clergy and bishops can't do this anymore, you know. We're not going to be trusted. The only authority going to trust it would say, somebody else, do it, open it, clean it all, you know, and we live with the consequences. Good question. Okay. Last one, and then we'll take the break.
Thank you. So I understand the concept, and it sounds like a good first step, and I understand the definition in the word forgive, but how does one know they are forgiven by another individual, or how do we know, or let another individual that wronged us, how does that person know that we have forgiven? If their actions no longer hurt me and I just don't care, is that forgiveness? I mean, I imagine forgiveness looks different to different people, but how does one know they are forgiven or have forgiven?
Okay, very good question. How do we know if we're forgiven and how do we let somebody know they're forgiven? Okay. Language works in two ways, okay? Well, let me give you a famous biblical thing, and then you'll get it from the biblical thing. We have that famous, it's a beautiful story, where they say one day this woman who had been hemorrhaging for 38 years, or 18 years, whatever it was, okay? She said, Jesus is in the crowd, if I just sneak up and touch his garment, I'm going to be whole, okay? So she snuck up and touched his garment, said, immediately the blood of flow stopped. She was healed, okay? But Jesus sensed something. He said, I've sensed power going out. Who touched me? They said, well, a lot of people. He said, no, somebody touched me. He said, then the woman became frightened. She came to him and she told him the whole truth. Then Jesus says, go, you're completely healed. Okay, now, notice there's two moments of healing there. Just the essential thing, with no words are spoken, and then there's words spoken, and the whole thing comes out. Okay, now, imagine this. Imagine you're in a family, and you hurt somebody. You know, you say something, whatever, you lost your temper, you're tired, and you throw your coffee cup across the room and stomp to your room. Okay, you've hurt their feelings. Now, 2 hours later or whenever, they're sitting at the table, you come out, you don't say a word, you just pick up your cup, which didn't break. You know, it was a Canadian Tire and so on. and you just sit at the edge of the table. Now, they're not stupid. They know that's your gesture, you know. You're saying, I'm sorry, you know. So you return to, so just touching the community, you're forgiven, okay? But now there's something still left, you know. A mature person will bring that to a moment of explicitness, maturity. So sometime, maybe 3 days later, maybe 3 years later, you'll say, you know when I did that? I'm sorry. See, then you're completely, see that. So oftentimes, you know, like you said, somebody hurts you, but now they're nice to you or not hurting you anymore. It's their way of saying it. And that's essential but not complete. So the best thing is if at some time they'll also say it to you. I'm sorry, you know. It's interesting. My last couple of years in Saskatoon, I worked with a number of sexual abuse victims. And a lot of them said, all I need, said, I don't need money, I don't need anything. I just need this person to say I'm sorry. But I need them to say it. Said, otherwise, I'm somehow carrying their sickness, And said, we need this person to say I'm sorry. And also they need the official church, when it's clerical stuff, to say I'm sorry, They need to hear that, because otherwise there's something inside of them that they can't let go of. Like one woman said, until this guy, she said, it was her uncle, said, you phone him and tell him he has to come and apologize to me or I'm going to the police. And this had happened like 11 years before. So I phoned the guy and he was pretty upset. But he came, and her and her husband came in the room and he apologized, And she said, that's all I need to hear from you. And she had told me, she said, unless I heard it from him, she said, I'm carrying his sickness. Then she left the room with her husband immediately. And this man, he sobbed for 2 hours that the room shook, which was also deeply healing for him, But see, so that there's times when it has to be, in traumatic situations, where it has to be explicitly said, And that's also why the church apologies are very important, in Ottawa, Canada, some years ago, when Archbishop Marcel Gervais was the Archbishop there, he did this, and bless him, what courage. But he had a mass on national television in which he, as the Archbishop of Ottawa, apologized to all the sexual abuse victims of clergy abuse, and so on. And it's interesting, a lot of the victims were there, and they shouted at him during Mass. They said, we don't want an apology from you. We want this from the dogs who hurt us, and so on. They kept interrupting, and so on. But he continued with the Mass. Afterwards, every one of them embraced him and thanked him for it. He said, we needed to hear that. We just needed to hear official church say that they were sick and we weren't. So sometimes the apology, the forgiveness has to be spoken, But in normal family life, a lot of times we're not strong enough to apologize, so we do it with our actions, Somebody hurts you, so the next day they're really nice to you. Well, you know what that means, Or vice versa. Sometimes we're not. See, and then we need to be strong enough to apologize. Incidentally, one footnote on that. That's also the way the Roman Catholic Church understands reconciliation. So if I asked you this, what is the primary sacrament of reconciliation for Roman Catholics? Not confession. It's the Eucharist in the community. Confession is the apology. Your sins are forgiven simply by coming to community. You're touching the hem of the garment. Now, mature people will also have a dialogue. Remember, the woman in Jesus, she's cured. She could go home. But Jesus asked her to explain things and then said, now you're completely healed. See, that there's a difference between essential healing and full healing. And again, those of you who are involved in 12-step programs, you know that. Your 5th step and all this and so on. Where at a certain point in the apology, at a certain point I'm going to talk about that the second hour. We have to own this and explicitly own it and express it to be completely free of it. Okay, let's take 10 minutes, come back in, and then we'll do the rest. So we're going to look at something I call commandments for the long haul. How do we empower ourselves to live beyond? And remember, when we talk about addictions, we're not just talking about somebody who needs to go to a clinic or whatever. We have all of our minor addictions in life, in our family life, and so on, our angers, and how do we overcome all of this? Okay, now, I'm leaving you one. Thanks, John. One major commandment. And, when I was my very first couple of years ordained, I had an elderly nun as my spiritual director, and she was good. And she said, she gave me a plaque that she made, and on the plaque was written those words on top, "Fear not, you are inadequate." Okay. Okay. And there's a lot of wisdom to that. Okay. So if you want to make a plaque and hang it on your wall, that'll do. Now, commandments for the long haul. I've put the first and the major one first, which in a certain sense contains it, and that is, don't lie, live honestly, and sin honestly. Okay? And those of you who come from Lutheran tradition, you know where I got the sin honestly from. That's a quote, direct quote from Martin Luther. Martin Luther said sin, well, he said in German, sin strongly, boldly, whatever. I was trying to find a German word for it and so on. But let's look at that. I want to begin with John's gospel. You know, John has a mystical gospel. And it's very interesting. But in John's gospel, at a certain point, Jesus has only one condition to come to him, and that is that you don't lie. So let me do this story. That's the famous story in John. It's either chapter 8 or 9. I always get these two chapters mixed up. It's either John 8 or chapter 9. Okay. It's the famous story of the man born blind. And this is the way the story works. John says, one day Jesus was walking in the temple precincts when he saw a man who had been born blind. Jesus comes up to the man and he says, do you want to be healed? And the man said, sure, I want to be healed. So Jesus took some cakes with spittle and he made cakes of mud and he put them in the man's eyes and he lifted them off and the man could see. And then the man was very happy. He started prancing around the temple and everybody could see it. And then said, how come you can see now? And the man said, well, this person called Jesus. No, he doesn't know who Jesus is. The man called Jesus put mud on my eye and now on spittle and now I can see. And the scribes and the Pharisees said, stop it, hold it right there. He says, we know from our law that only somebody who comes from God can cure a man who's been born blind. And we know that this man doesn't come from God, so don't tell us he did this. The man said, look, I know nothing about that's theology. Okay. You're the scribes, that's your area. He said, I know nothing about this. All I know is that I couldn't see, and this guy put mud in my eye, and now I can see. They said that, look, they said, you were born in sin, and so you're already disprivileged, and so on, and you're trying to tell us what theology is? And the guy said, I'm not trying to tell you anything. I don't know anything about that. He said, all I know is I couldn't see. He put mud in my eye, and now I can see. So they call his parents in. And they said, tell him to stop saying that. Okay? And they didn't want to be excommunicated. They said, look, he's old enough. He's an adult. Let him speak, you know. So they call him back in. And he's beginning to catch on now. They said, you know, you were born in sin. We are people who know the law. We safeguard God's rule on earth. And you're trying to say something that's untrue. And he said, I don't know. Well, pardon me. Now he's getting cut. He said, I find that really curious, that you know the law, and you know how God operates, and yet he did this, and you can't accept it? And then they excommunicated him, and they threw him out of the synagogue. Okay? Then he finds Jesus, and he becomes the second believer in John's gospel, the first one being the woman at the well. Now, John presents this man in this sense. Here's a man, notice, he wasn't looking for Jesus. Jesus found him. Okay? So John presents him as a man, he's not that bright, and he's not that spiritually interested, except he has one great feature, he won't lie. He simply won't tell a lie, and because he won't tell a lie, Jesus finds him, and through his refusal to lie, he eventually his eyes are opened, and he becomes Jesus' second disciple. You know. Now in John's gospel, John wants you to know that there's only one condition to enter the kingdom of heaven, which is ultimate sobriety, and that is you have to refuse to lie. And also the reverse is true. So in the Gospels, the most dangerous of all sins is lying. So that Satan is presented, Satan is the prince of lies. He's the principle of untruth. It's not the principle of sex or darkness. He's the principle of lying. So that in Scripture, you're going to see that's also true in the Synoptic Gospels. The most dangerous of all sins is lying, and the greatest virtue of all, the virtue that will lead you to God, is simply you have to tell the truth. That dishonesty is darkness. Honesty is light. Now, that reverses, you know, that's why Martin Luther coined his famous thing, that sin honestly. God can deal with sin, God can't deal with lying. Why not? That's, see, what John has, that's the opposite of what the Synoptic Gospel says. You know, there's the Synoptic Gospel of Matthew, Mark, and Luke, and John is separate. Okay. In Matthew, Mark, and Luke, they don't have this, but they have the reverse. That is where Jesus says you can commit a sin that is unforgivable. Remember, he said, you can blaspheme against the Holy Spirit, and if you blaspheme against the Holy Spirit, you're guilty of an eternal sin which can never be forgiven. Do you ever wonder what that sin is? And whether you stumbled into it? Okay. What is the unforgivable sin against the Holy Spirit? It's this. Now notice the context, and you're going to see it's the same. It's in the Synoptic Gospels. Jesus has just cast out a demon, okay? And in the Jewish theology of the time, they believed that only somebody who comes from God can cast out a demon. But this was a very inconvenient truth. So the scribes and Pharisees said, well, you cast out a demon by the power of Beelzebub, the prince of demons. And Jesus said, well, that wouldn't make any sense. If Satan's casting out Satan, his house is divided and so on, but they didn't buy it. So Jesus says, be very careful. There's many sins you can commit, and they're forgivable. But if you blaspheme the Holy Spirit, you're guilty of an eternal sin that can never be forgiven. What's the sin? It's this. Notice, they were denying a truth. They knew that only somebody who came from God could do this, but they didn't want to believe that Jesus came from God, and so they lied. They lied to themselves, and Jesus said that's the most dangerous of all sins, and the reason it can become unforgivable is at a certain point you can believe your own lie. See, if you lie long enough, eventually you believe your own lie. You know, the first time you tell a lie, you know it. If someone says, what color is that behind me? And you say, it's inconvenient to say it's white, you say it's brown. You know you're telling a lie. The 100th time you say it, you're going to start believing it. Incidentally, in our society today, that's the most dangerous thing that's happening. We are losing truth, you know, fake news and who knows what's true and so on. It's the most dangerous thing of all, you know. See, because truth is everything. And so you can believe your own lie. See, then the sin becomes unforgivable, not because God doesn't want to forgive it. You no longer want to be forgiven. You start seeing truth as falsehood and falsehood as truth. You know, if there's anybody in hell, people in hell aren't there. They say, no, if I had 5 minutes over, now I know the truth, I'd give myself over to God, I'd make an act of contrition. Jesus said, make an act of contrition, you're back in heaven. You know, if there's somebody in hell, they're there feeling sorry for people in heaven. If that's what you want, see, they see heaven as hell and hell as heaven. You know, but it begins with lying. So the most dangerous moral thing you can do is to lie. And the most important moral thing you can do positively is to just refuse to tell a lie. You see it in John's Gospel. This man, simply because he doesn't lie. He's not interested in religion. He's not interested in Jesus. He doesn't know anything about theology, but he tells the truth. Jesus finds you and brings you to discipleship. Will bring you to sobriety and so on. In terms, again, getting back to 12-step programs and other programs, they're all predicated on this truth. As long as you're lying, it's not going to work. And lying, again, has degrees. I remember a young priest that I knew from our community. We sent him to a 12-step program, an intervention, and he came back in this 1988. He's been sober since, and so on. But he said he was in this group process, and he said, I thought I was telling the truth. And finally, one man said, John, why don't you tell the truth? He said, you haven't told the truth since you were 3 years old with your mother. He said, now stop the bullshit. Just tell the truth. He said, I thought I was. I realized I wasn't. You know, there's truth and there's truth. We need to stop lying. You know, it's interesting. See, as soon as we lie, then the immediate thing happens, rationalization. That's what begins to warp us. Notice with original sin, where original sin should have stopped. God puts Adam and Eve in the garden. And last week, remember, we looked a little bit at what that original sin was. But then they break the commandment. So God comes and he finds them cowering in the bushes. And he said to them, you broke the commandment? And Adam said, it wasn't my fault. If you hadn't created the woman, now there's real ownership. Yeah. It confronts Eve. Eve says, it wasn't my fault. If the snake hadn't tempted me, if they'd have been cowering in the bushes and God said, you ate the apple, they'd said, it seemed like a good idea at the time. That would have stopped it, But see, immediately sin, lying, rationalization, spreads the consequence in history and so on. So that the most single important thing is telling the truth, sinning honestly. Ruth Burroughs, the British Carmelite, tells this story. It's a great story. And she says, she once lived with a nun, she says, who was a Carmelite nun. She said, she was thoroughly mediocre. Okay. So it's the only way you could describe it, a thoroughly mediocre nun. Said, because she didn't pray. Said, she was a pleasant woman to live with. Said, but, you leave the world to pray. You don't pray while you're in the wrong place, Said, she was great in recreation. Said, but she was just mediocre. Said, but she was always honest. Said, she never pretended she was anything other than she was, which was a mediocre nun. Said, and then she got cancer. And as she realized she was dying, said she tried harder. Said she made new resolutions, and now she's going to become this Mother Teresa. But said 60 years of bad habits don't break very easily. Said, and she died. A weak nun. Said, but she died a happy death. She died a happy death. She died the death of a sinner asking God to forgive her for a life of weakness. She died a happy death. Said, that's what a happy death is. When I was a kid, we used to pray, our family rosary and so on, and some of you are older, remember you'd pray for a happy death. That's what Catholics did. But we always fantasized the happy death this way. This was kind of the catechetical story they tell us. There was a man, and he drifted from church and drifted from his wife and his responsibilities, and he became a dilettante and lived for himself and committed all kinds of mortal sins. And then one day, grace struck him, and he went back to church, went to confession, went to Mass, had communion, out and died of a heart attack on the church steps. So he died a happy death. He had been a sinner, and at the last minute he pulled it all together, And then yet the reverse story, somebody who's really a good person, and one day he has a fight with his wife, and he goes out and gets hit by a car, and he's killed, and now he dies angry. Neither of them has to do with a happy death. A happy death isn't whether it catches you on an up bounce, just had confession, or a down bounce, the one night you got drunk and passed out under the pool table, That can be consoling to your family, but as Ruth Burroughs so brilliant puts it, neither of them is that happy death if you die honestly. Said, this woman, she was mediocre, said she died a happy death, the death of a sinner asking God to forgive her for a life of weakness. She has a great quote there. She says, only a saint can afford a saint's death. The rest of us have to go out in our eyes and the eyes of our entourage as the sinners that we are. Fear not, you are inadequate. We're all sinners, but we have to own it. That's what Martin Luther meant when he said, sin honestly, sin bravely. God can forgive sin, but God can't forgive us what you don't want to be forgiven for, See, we're always as sick as our sickest secret. We have to be honest, to open it up. I just finished reading, this is a footnote, it's not here, just finished reading Jordan Peterson's famous book. Some of you know, probably the most famous book in the last couple of years written is by Jordan Peterson, this book called The 12 Rules for Life. And it's the most read and reviewed book. But he has some powerful things in there. He has 2 chapters on truth-telling. And again, he'd say the same thing. And he's coming at it from an agnostic point of view, although he has deep sympathy for Christianity. But he says, it's so critical that you never lie. And he actually uses the Christian scriptures to say that. He says, at the beginning of, if you take the Jewish scriptures, our Old Testament, they say in the beginning was the formless void. There was chaos, and God spoke. See, God's word, God said, let there be light. And the word begins to still the chaos. And he said, we actually still chaos through language. But he says, when we lie, the opposite happens. We create more chaos. And actually, it's a very challenging chapter. He says, you should never tell lies, that even a little white lie to protect people. Sometimes I've told white lies to protect people, you know. The one time we had to, sometimes you have to fire somebody for incompetence, you know. So you don't say, well, we're firing you because you're incompetent. No, we're making budget cuts. That's it. You try to question it, you know, and so on. You do this. He said, don't do that. Don't even do that. He said, you just never, never lie. He said, now he's coming at agnostically. He said, but it's true. He said, it brings chaos. Lying sows chaos. He said, it sows chaos into your own soul, not just into the world, you know. So that's the first rule, and it's the major rule. To, you know, simply to stop lying. And any of you who are in 12-step programs, you know that that's the essence of the program. Okay, and as long as you're lying, you will never be sober. And that's not just for people in 12-step, all of us. To the extent that I'm not radically honest in my life, I'm still not in radical sobriety. Because we saw radical sobriety is complete transparency. The number two, we're not at number two, okay. He said, humbly admit your own weakness. Okay. Again, we have great scriptural stuff on this. Remember the parable of the Pharisee and the publican. Jesus says two people go up to pray, you know. The first one is a Pharisee, and he says, Lord, I thank you that I'm not like other people, that I don't have their weaknesses. Notice he's not a bad person, you know. He's saying, we all say that. Thank God I'm not like this guy in the gutter. Thank God I'm not, you know, like this guy who's dishonest and so on. He's an adulterer and so on. Thank God I'm not like that, you know. And he says, I do this thing and I fast and I pray and I keep my life together. He said, and the other one was a publican. He said, he couldn't even lift his head out. He was saying, God, be merciful to me, a sinner. You know, he said, the second man prayed. The first guy didn't pray, you know. See, so that, you know, the importance of simply admitting our weakness, you know, because pride has to go with that. It's hard for someone to say, I'm a sinner, you know. You know, this nun who gave me this line about, fear not, you are inadequate. She would come to confession, and she'd always, and she'd say, forgive me, for I'm a loved sinner. So one thing to put together, I'm a sinner. I'm loved as a sinner, but I'm a loved sinner. We also have to put those two together. We're sinners, but God loves us, you know. Well, you've got it. Then, thirdly, don't rely on your own willpower, okay, and your own strength. Draw strength from others and from God. Remember when Jesus says to Peter, he says it's hard for a rich man to go to heaven, and Peter says, if that's the case, it's impossible. God says, it is impossible. You can't do this through willpower alone. You need grace. You need community. Okay. And Scripture makes that clear. You know, today's gospel is a wonderful gospel, where it's in Luke's gospel, where the disciples come up to Jesus and they say, Lord, teach us to pray. Okay. Now, it's really interesting. I think I went through it the first night with you, where Jesus teaches us the Lord's Prayer, but in the other Gospels, he has to volunteer the lesson. At a certain point, he says, like, I want to teach you how to pray. In Luke's Gospel, they come and they say, we want to learn how to pray. Because in Luke's Gospel, they sense this. Actually, Luke's Gospel, the preeminent Gospel on prayer. In Luke's Gospel, Jesus prays more than all the other Gospels put together. And he's always shown in prayer and so on. And Luke describes Jesus interiorly in his prayer. But this is what's unique to Luke's Gospel. In Luke's Gospel, the disciples notice there's something extraordinary about Jesus. And it's what that they want. And it's not so much his miracles. It's not that he can walk on water and so on. That's not what impresses them. What ultimately impresses them is that he can forgive enemies, that he can love people who hate him. He can do all this, you know, stuff that he's preaching, which we can't do. Jesus could turn the other cheek. We can't. But they sensed he was drawing this power from elsewhere. They sensed that, you know, his power to forgive an enemy and so on was coming from some other place. And they sensed it was coming from his prayer life. So in Luke's gospel, they come and say, Lord, teach us to pray. We want to learn to pray, so we can have this power to forgive others and so on, to draw strength from the outside. Because you can't do that on willpower. You can't forgive an enemy. You can do it, just say, I forgive you, but your heart won't, you can't do it. For our emotions and everything else to move, something else has to move us. There's some wonderful, I want to give you just a couple of images. This is one from Luke's gospel. But there's some other beautiful, and oftentimes artists can nail this for us, so that, for instance, the stoning of St. Stephen, the way it's described is also like an icon on prayer and grace, and it's this. Like Luke is describing, it's in Acts of the Apostles. So Luke wrote the description. He says, the crowd, they were jealous of Stephen, and they were all angry, They had just watched the 6 o'clock news, and they were all angry. Okay. He said, and they were looking at each other, and they rushed at Stephen. He said, but Stephen's eyes were turned towards heaven. Sometimes artists get that for you, see. So they're looking at each other, and because they're looking at each other, they're in jealousy, they're in bitterness, they're murderous. But Stephen is connected to something that they're not connected to. He's connected to God, And see, so it's a powerful image of prayer. See, he's connected, and so he's not caught in the jealousy and all that the ideology and religiosity and everything else that they're caught up in, and their anger and bitterness. He's drawing strength from elsewhere. It's a powerful image, And then you have the same thing in a different image, but beautiful prayer image in the book of Daniel, where Daniel says when there was in fact, at times when you're discouraged and you've just watched the news and you need a little help, just read the book of Daniel, Remember Daniel said, there was a time where people prayed, said, today we have no prophet, no priest, no high priest, no first fruits, no language, and nothing we can agree on. That was the time of Daniel. It seems like the whole world had apostatized except 3 young men, They said the 3 young men, and then the archetypal bad king, Nebuchadnezzar, he brings them and says, you will apostatize or I will kill you. So they refused to apostatize. So they said the king got enraged, and he told the people, he said, heat the furnace 7 times hotter than usual. It's going to be an interesting metaphor. So make the flames 7 times hotter than they usually are. Then they pitched these young men into these flames, which were 7 times normal temperature, okay? And they shut the door, but they said the young men were singing sacred songs, and then the flames couldn't touch them. So they're walking around inside these flames, singing sacred songs, and then when the king opened, they saw that they were completely unharmed. See, powerful image of prayer, especially today. Today, sometimes we are walking in flames that are 7 times hotter than normal. The flames of bitterness, anger, greed, lust, so on in our country. Sometimes, we're just living in some really hot temperatures, But the whole idea of Daniel, as long as you're singing sacred songs, they're not going to touch you. And as soon as you stop singing sacred songs, those flames are going to consume you, It's interesting as Christians, do you ever wonder why we use doxology so much? Where we say, in the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, glory be to the Father, and to the Son, and to the Holy Spirit. And those of you who come from Eastern, Orthodox or Ukrainian traditions, you're making the sign of the cross like every 8 seconds, and, when you go to a liturgy, pretty well wore out. You don't have to go to gymnasium that day, and so on. Okay. Why do we do this? Or like the Jesuit slogan, the Jesuits say, for the greater glory of God, which at some cynics say, I don't think God needs the Jesuits to have glory, and so on. Okay. No, God doesn't need it. We need it. You know why we do this? Because every time you're saying, glory be to God, you're dethroning yourself. We're saying, God is the center of the universe, and I'm not the center of the universe. And, all the heroes and Hollywood stars and football, they're not the center of the universe. God is center. Glory be to the Father, to the Son, to the Holy Spirit. As soon as we stop saying that, we say, glory be to me. See, we need to be those doxologies, because it takes glory away from us. We're giving it to God, giving it to God. It's prayer, you know. See, and that's what empowers us. That's what gives us. See, when I'm saying glory be to me, then I can't forgive somebody. I can't give up a grudge. I can't give up a compensatory, you know, pleasure and so on. I can't do it, you know, because I'm not praying the prayer of Daniel. See, so you have in Scripture, those are beautiful images. The young man walking around the midst of flames 7 times hotter than normal. Stephen, his eyes, the crowd are looking at each other. They're jealous and bitter and murderous. He's connected to something else, you know. Luke's gospel, you know, Jesus, he's finding strength that from elsewhere, and he can forgive enemies and do these things. He can live the gospel, and we can't, because we're trying to live by willpower. Okay. One more, and then I'll leave a little trouble at the end. And that is, own your past. Apologize and make amends, including to yourself. You know, I just read an article a couple of days ago, and it's an old philosophical question, you know, where they say, are you the same person you were when you were 8, 9, 10? Now, if you're Aristotelian, you are, you know. So remember Aristotle, his thing about substance and accidents. Your accidents change, you remain the same substance. But again, I just want to use an example without necessarily siding on it. But somebody just on Sunday's paper in the faith section was writing an article defending Kavanaugh. And this person, who's actually a very good Christian, so it's Rob Drager, the person who wrote the Benedict option, and he said, what if Kavanaugh did this? So what? He was 17 years old. This is high school. He said, we're not the same people today as we were at 17. He said, I'm not the same person I was at 17. Well, he may not be, but the woman is. You know, that's the whole in that argument. When you're with Massey 4 or whatever, she's still the same person. So we all are. See, so that we need, and again, that's part of all recovery programs, we need to own honestly our past. You know, not just that other weak people can forgive us, that we can forgive ourselves. You know, I'm not saying Kavanaugh's guilty or innocent, just the example. You know, we are still the same person. You know, today an expression that's both functional and dysfunctional is the expression we use so much. You know, moving forward. You know. Well, yes and no. You know, I've just run over you and you were lying with 2 broken legs. So, moving forward, okay. It's easier for the guy driving than for the person run over, you know. That doesn't work. You know, you can only move forward if you also own your past, you know. And see, so that part of accessing grace, a very important part, forgiveness, is we have to own our past. You know, we have to own it in honesty. We all have to do 5th steps and so on. Otherwise, if we don't own it, it'll always be there. It's always be there. And we can't hide behind lines like, well, I'm not the same person. I was young, needed to work. That's supposed to be funny, but anyway. It's the line they always use in Hollywood. You acted in some B pictures. I was young, needed to work. Okay. You know, see, and that's the only way we can forgive ourselves. Otherwise, it always stays, you know. And we are the same person, you know. I'm saying that just because I'm Aristotelian. But when you work with victims and so on, you realize it's not right for someone to say, oh, we'll just move forward. Let's pretend this never happened. No, it happened, you know. And if you have a permanent scar, the scar stays. Or if somebody's dead, they're dead, you know. Which doesn't mean we can't move forward and forgive. We need to do that, but it's predicated on owning, you know. You know, it's interesting. People who have had children victimized or murdered and so on, they can let go when the murderer says, look, I'm sorry. I was stupid. I was young, you know, and so on. Then he can move on and they can move on, you know. But it's predicated on we have to own our past, okay? And then we're always in recovery. That line that grace, you know, in 12-step programs, say the program works if you work it. And it doesn't work if you don't work it. The program works if you work it. That's also true of the gospel and grace. The gospel works if you work it. Grace works if you work it. Remember when Jesus says, if you believe, it's the end of Mark's gospel, says, if you believe in us, you can pick up deadly snakes, they won't hurt you. Drink poison, won't hurt you. Don't try this. Okay. Unless you have faith. If you have enough faith, it works. You know, Mother Teresa could have walked down any alley in the whole world and nobody would have touched her. You and I can't do that, you know, or maybe you can, I can't. Okay. See, people who take just radical faith in the gospel works. You know, it's a great story. You know who Andre Dubus is? Okay. Anybody here from Louisiana? You got to know that. Okay. Andre Dubus, there's two Andre Dubuses, father, son. Okay. And the son today, Andre Dubus III, he's written some Hollywood films, you know, The House of Fog and Sand and so on. But his father, Andre Dubus, was a Catholic, New Orleans man who wrote some marvelous essays. And towards the end of his life, he wrote a book. Incidentally, he wrote a very fine book on the Eucharist, you know, in which he said, I'm a Roman Catholic. He said, I go to Eucharist every day because without Eucharist, God becomes a monologue. Okay. But he wrote a book to the end of his life. His last book was called Reflections from a Moving Chair. And the moving chair was a wheelchair. He had been, about 2 years before he died, he stopped at a traffic accident to help some people. And while he was helping them, he was hit by a car. And he spent the last 2 years of his life paralyzed in a wheelchair. Okay. But he writes these essays, and he says, when he was a young man, and he was a big man, this guy was 6'4" and rough and tough. And he said, you know something? He says, I always carried guns. He said, I had guns in my car, I had guns in my home. He said, and I always considered myself a peace officer at large. And he said, I did things, you know. He said, one time, he said, I was in a restaurant in New Orleans with my wife. We came out. We had these young thugs. They were intimidating a young black kid. He said, I pulled out my gun, backed them all off. My wife got on the cell phone, called the cops. And he said, my whole life I protected myself with guns. Then, this is the story. When he's old and helpless in a wheelchair, he said, take all my guns away. He said, now God will protect me. Notice the paradox and irony in that. When he was young, strong, powerful, he said, give me guns, I need to protect myself. When he's old, in a wheelchair, he says, I don't need that protection. God will protect me, you know. Notice he reached a point where the gospel worked for him, where he could pick up deadly snakes and they don't hurt him. He could drink poison and it won't kill him, you know. He was safe, you know. But notice, the gospel works to the extent that we work it, but that's also true with grace. To the extent that we simply abandon ourselves to this power, it'll work for us. To the extent that, oh, I don't know, Jesus, I can trust and so on. Maybe this isn't real. You know, you have that wonderful example in Scripture of Peter, when they see Jesus walking on the water, and Peter likes it. He said, let me try it. Jesus said, well, try it. So Peter gets out and he starts walking, and as soon as he was conscious, I don't know if I can do this, he goes things like a stone, you know. See, as long as he was trusting it, it worked. As soon as he started focusing on it, he sank like a stone. See, the gospel works if you work it. Grace works if you work it. It doesn't work if you don't work it, you know. And then lastly, let God be an effective and not just a pedagogical force in your life. And I'll just come back to the first night. I'm going to end here where I started the first night, and that's that powerful passage in John's gospel. You know, remember, John's gospel begins with this. They come up to Jesus, and Jesus says to them, what are you looking for? And John's entire gospel is an attempt to answer that. They're looking for the way, the truth, the life, the water of life, to be born again, all these things, to not tell lies, and so on. But at the original ending of John's Gospel in chapter 20, the question's repeated. On Easter Sunday in the morning, Mary Magdalene comes to the grave. She sees Jesus, doesn't recognize him, and Jesus says to her, "What are you looking for?" And she says, "Well, I'm looking for the body of the dead Jesus," and so on. And Jesus answered the gospel in one word. He pronounces her name in love, says, "Mary." She falls at his feet. I mean, she became his disciple, and so on. See, he pronounced her name in love. That's. Remember, I told you I went to a retreat with French-Canadian director, and he said, these are all priests, old crusty people like myself. He said, "I'm going to try to teach you how to pray in a special way. So you pray that sometime in your prayer you can hear God say to you, 'I love you.'" He said, "Because before that you're going to be trying to live your life by willpower, and you can't do it." He said, "After that you can." And remember, I said that's the entire evangelical religion. That's the strength and the power of evangelicalism, you know. See, basically, that effective moment where they say, have you met Jesus Christ? And so on. Now, in Roman Catholic thought, and we tried to capture that in our devotions, and the Sacred Heart, and Mary, and so on. And, we try to capture some of that to bring it that God is not just a rule. God is not just a code we obey. God isn't a religion. God is a person. And our relationship to God isn't just one of obedience or I'm doing it like the older brother, the prodigal son. There's got to be some affectivity, that we feel, God is a person, a friend, a lover. And see, that's ultimately, to the extent that we can get that, we're into grace, we don't do good so that God loves us, okay? We should have a sense that God loves us, and that'll empower us to do good. So often, if we're caught in a meritology, which oftentimes we are, I'm going to be a good person so I go to heaven. I'm going to be a good person so God loves me. It's not the way it works, the reverse. We have to sense God loves me, and that's going to empower me to be a good person. That's going to make me want to be a good person, And, in a marriage, the man doesn't say, I'm not going to commit adultery so my wife loves me. No, it said, my wife loves me. That's why I'm not going to commit adultery. It's the same with God. See, grace comes first.